Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So I saw this prompt on Twitter today. What are your thoughts on Sith Troopers from episode 9? I responded, but I'd like to expand on that response in today's video. I said, it's cool. I like how it looks like musculature, but it makes no sense. It is supposed to be a Final Order design, but matches the First Order Stormtrooper perfectly. They had no idea what they were doing. And yeah, that's always sort of been my issue. They look so cool. The red makes them so distinct. They're Death Trooper-like in terms of proportions, i.e. they've got almost a more athletic looking armor, and the striations across the plating just gives a really cool look, almost like you've stripped a Stormtrooper down to just the muscles, which I think makes sense for what's meant to be almost like the ultimate version of the warrior. But as I pointed out in my tweet, it's also a bit weird, despite the fact that the Sith Trooper is meant to be a creation of the Final Order, i.e. created by Palpatine in secrecy. It seems to be an evolution of the First Order Stormtrooper design, particularly as we see with the helmet. You can check out the art book for the Rise of Skywalker, and a lot of what I've been saying here is essentially confirmed, including the fact that, yeah, the Sith Trooper was meant to be more agile looking like the Death Trooper and was red to invoke the feel or aesthetic of a thing flayed or with its organs exposed. Additionally, looking through the book, we can see that the design did not come out of an attempt to create specifically a Sith Trooper. Rather, JJ wanted a red Stormtrooper. That was the starting point, and you can see a ton of concept art where the Sith Troopers are clearly just elite First Order forces. They're standing on the bridge of a Star Destroyer, for example. Or the principles behind their aesthetic influenced other First Order forces like the Jump Trooper, for instance. It seems clear to me, reading the art book or really just watching the movie, that the distinction between a Final Order and a First Order faction was not always the plan, which, I mean, makes sense. It's super confusing for average audiences, and it's just unnecessary as well. So what I mean to say is that I don't think initially the plan was for Palpatine to have his own fleet and troopers and whatever else, and I think that's why we see weird holdovers like the Sith Trooper being a First Order design and with the Final Order. That being said, I'm still happy it's in the movie because it is such a cool design. The only thing I don't really like about the Sith Trooper is its blaster. It's just like the First Order Stormtrooper's blaster. It looks too much like a toy. But the real question is, can we figure out a way to make the incongruent lore work, i.e. the First Order design being in the hands of the Final Order? And I put this out on Twitter, and some of you had some interesting thoughts, some which I think we'll see are pretty close to what the lore explanation is. This one from Jeremy says, the First Order and Sith Eternal shared many manufacturing companies and supply chains. It makes sense the armor looks like First Order armor because it's probably made in the same factories First Order armor is made in. Which is interesting. I do find the idea of a First Order officer on a factory inspection taking a wrong turn and finding just like a crate full of these red armor pieces or an assembly line. But Cody also touches on this point. Palpatine was pulling the strings all along from Mexico, so it makes sense the design would be the same. He's always been the Phantom Menace. And yeah, that also makes sense. Palpatine's really been behind it all, so it makes sense. There's some aesthetic continuity there. I do think, before we continue, that it would have been a lot better for the troopers just to be Kylo's personal guard. I think that was sort of the intention, where they are a mix between the Praetorian Guard and Palpatine's original Red Guards. Interestingly, I find the ones in Mando Season 3 look even closer, but let's continue looking for that explanation. So the visual guide actually kind of walks back the distinction between the First Order and Final Order slightly. Watching the movie, if Kylo Ren doesn't know about the Final Order, does anyone? The visual dictionary implies it's possible. Like, the way I always imagined it was that Palpatine has the Final Order, it's doing its own thing, while the First Order is created completely separately, controlled mostly by Snoke. Obviously, Palpatine is still pulling the strings ultimately, but with the two having no real interaction. The book makes it seem like the Final Order or the Sith Eternal were always a hidden elite portion of the First Order, which only a few knew about, simply because of how information was kept secret. When talking about the Sith Troopers, for example, it said that these fighting forces have been cultivated in secret, their existence unknown to most within the First Order. So if that's the case, and if it all falls under the same umbrella, it makes a bit more sense. The problem is the movie does such a poor job of... the distinction shouldn't have been there in the first place, because even now, we're, almost 6 years later, it doesn't make sense. Reading the Star Wars wiki page, it treats the Final Order as specifically the fleet and the force on Exegol and nothing really else. So it's really just, rather than a new faction, this single offensive powerful arm of the First Order from Exegol. So they're called Final Order Stormtroopers not because the Final Order is a different faction, but because these Stormtroopers specifically were stationed on the Star Destroyers and a part of that fleet. That doesn't mean that it was just the armor which was different, as the book explains. First Order Stormtroopers came from the children of Sith cultists, so they're already pretty wild. Then they also go through some flash training, which makes them even crazier. So it's weird though, you read through the dictionary for the Rise of Skywalker, and I don't really think they use the term Final Order very much. It's rather the First Order partnering with the Sith Eternal. I think eventually, had they won, they probably would have just called it the Sith Empire or the Sith Eternal, period. So I guess you could think of the Final Order as being the Sith Eternal fleet. It's just so complex, but part of the thing is the First Order, they didn't know there was that initial Sith backing. They didn't present themselves as Sith. Snoke existed. He didn't seem to be a Sith Lord. Certainly Kylo Ren was not, and they weren't trying to establish a new Sith Empire. They were basically trying to make a new empire, period. So I guess the Final Order was for when the curtain was dropped and the truth of things was revealed to the galaxy. Interestingly, I was checking the novelization just before finishing this video, and Poe says that he's built the largest fleet the galaxy's ever seen. He calls it the Final Order, i.e. the Final Order is the fleet itself, while also simultaneously being their campaign against the rest of the galaxy. So yeah, hopefully that explains it. I gotta say, I learned something in making this video about what the Final Order actually was. I guess it works, sort of, but it still doesn't really make sense. The decision to present it as they did still does not make sense. That's the Rise of Skywalker, though, and that's this video. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.